There's an old adage that in space no one can hear you scream. Now this is due to the fact that there's no oxygen, you're all alone, there's no easy way to get to you, the usual horrors of mundane space travel, but even in the far future this still applies to any kind of distress beacon. Any kind of call to aid in a diasporan world, a mining station, a small outpost in the middle of nowhere, a ship that's gone down or attacked by pirates. The reality is, being far away from a core world or out in the diaspora, Central Committee has almost no power, even back with SETCOM, and with the downsized Navy of ThirdCom, even less likely to have a response. And even if one does respond, they're around the core worlds, they're around the gates, they're not even going to be able to arrive within your lifetime. And just like that old adage, no one will hear you scream. No one except the Albatross. Hi, hello, and welcome back to Lancer, our favorite mech tabletop RPG, where today we're talking about another faction. A minor one, but the Albatross. The closest thing to a pure good guy, namely just because of their stance of shoot first, ask question laters, gung-ho, ronin, samurai. Not literally those things, but the idea of the hero that goes in, deals with the problem, then leaves. They're not here to conquer, build a nation state, make money, they're not a corporation. They're more like knights errant or paladins on a quest. Small strike forces of mech pilots and navies going out into the void to answer any distress beacon, as that is their main mission. The exact specifics, depending upon the local commander, vary wildly, but the overall goal is to help whenever there is a call to aid. Though in reality, you kind of see there's a lot more caveats to that. Now usually with a faction, we'd go into some of their history, but we don't have a lot for the Albatross. For a mix of reasons. One, because they're not really one of the big actual factions. Yes, they are a faction, yes, they are a nomadic nation state, but they're not really moving their military and political weight around in the general hegemony. They're not here to nation build. They have their MAKTEBAS, they have their small fleets, they have their entire order. The entire galactic politics of the hegemony and union doesn't really matter to them. They're just here to help people. That isn't to saying they don't end up getting tied up into all of this, but as a larger organization and goal, they try to avoid it. But from what we do know, they've been around for thousands of years, even from SETCOM, maybe FirstCom? But due to the fact that a huge chunk of their own population is entirely separate from real-time, their heavy use of sublight and long-distance travel, they've entirely separated themselves in these small nomadic clans. So much so that some of their commanders' names or dates listed within other organizations has a year set next to it. So you'll have your rank, your role, your name, and then after that you'll have your year. Essentially, what kind of real time did you separate from and are kind of stuck in? A mix of relative travel and stasis pods, these guys last forever. So a good chunk of the actual Albatross you'll meet are actually from the past, or at least originated from the past, but they're already so isolated as a culture they just might not know the total galactic landscape. If you're out in the diaspora and they've arrived previously, your great-great-great-grandparents were the people who originally met them, and they haven't aged a day, seemingly. And especially with the role of accepting any distress beacon being this separate vigilante force on a galactic scale, mix in the Immortal heritage, the distance and separation of time, they really have that image of this separate divine entity. Not quite literally, but honestly, some planets might have that view of them. But a reputation and perception of being this distant force, or this distant view, almost out of touch with the rest of Union, the hegemony, the galaxy. And that's why we don't really have any direct history, especially because once they separate into the separate MAKTEBAS, which are their core monastic moons or stations, their safe harbor, their dry dock, their landed population that their fleets head out from, even these places are locked in relative time and separate from each other. Roughly based around when they were founded or when the people were coming, they're kind of this stasis of what the galaxy was like a few hundred years ago or even further back. Then take into account communication differences, fragmented locations of commanders, so there's very few clear lines of where they came from or how they exactly formed into this. People outside and even inside their order have several myths based around what their origins might have been, or their original mission purpose origins. Several stories about what was the first MAKTEBA, or what original fleet, or the first wings. But outside of being maybe a potential headache, it's like Horus. You have a lot of wiggle room. Similar to their cells and their dodgy history or exact nature, you have the individual MAKTEBAs, the different fleets, the different commanders, the different sources of time. But heading on to those pockets, those factions, those MAKTEBA, these are the pockets of technical territory that the Albatross actually owns, or has. Recognized as semi-nomadic autonomous state by Union, they don't actually have any connections to Union, no solid one. They have a central commander that different forces can talk to or refer to, but the Valadores potentially have a more centralized authority than even the Albatross. The Valadores even have an embassy in CENTCOM. The Albatross don't. But the Albatross do actually have connections to people. It's just not any of these. Not CENTCOM, it's not Harrison Armory, it's not the KTB. But if you remember from a previous video, IPS-N. It's not just that IPS-N sponsors them, like listed in that previous video. They do. They provide a lot of the ships, a lot of different forces, build up some of the stations, because they're an anti-pirate force. They're not needing to be paid, they're not mercenaries you need to pay off, they're not accepting bribes of any kind, potentially. They have a mission statement to protect the stars in any distress beacon. And when you are a galactic shipping force, that is a huge boon. Not to mention the marketing. The fact that they are already a known galactic force, they've been around for thousands of years, there's stories of them on the Omninet. Hard to beat, hey, we funded the good guys. This doesn't just stretch to diplomats, they have an official embassy in the Argo Navis system, some of those private resorts mentioned in the other video, locked in time to help with stasis and readjustment from the temporal destabilization. This also stretches to just a full-on presence of the Albatross, namely with some of their own members, this embassy, the permanent connections to be able to get these resources from Argo Navis and from IPS-N, to the point there's very likely a MAKTEBAS somewhere on one of the moons of Argo Navis, or at least a station within the web of stations above the planet. But this is the closest connection they have diplomatically or to anything within real space or real time. So much so that IPS-N not only offers these parts for their ships, for some of their stations, but for their loyal wings as well, permanently providing the Nelson as a license just directly associated with the Albatross. Hence why it kind of looks a bit different from the general sturdy nature and industrial angle a lot of IPS-N follows under. It's a knight. This isn't IPS-N first, this is Albatross first. With the red and gold banners, the silver on some of their ships and shrines, this is built for a cosmopolitan knight errant. That is how close the relation is, to the point that the Albatross basically has one of their own licenses. But to those forces themselves, those armaments, the people that use those mechs, those ships, the wings, the loyal wings, or just wings. The first part being just a kind of title, like there's honored wing. They kind of fill the same rank, it's just a rough position socially that you fill in. There's no actual direct hierarchy above wing. These are your mech pilots, and these are actually the brute force of every deployment. While the mech pilots, their lancers, aren't necessarily the entire force, you know, they're a cosmopolitan force. They're ships and navy first. They have to travel somewhere. And even most of their fighting takes place within space. But their mechs are definitely the brute force, ranging from 5 to 200 out of every detachment, proper mech pilots and chassis, and then roughly 4 to 5 medium ships that can handle sublight and low orbit combat. Because if they can help it, they're going to do most of their stuff within space, that is their domain. But if needed, they can still go from orbit to ground surgical strikes and then quickly redeploy. But alongside this, you also have a number of light armored troops, other people that can just go on board, act as support, number of fighters to go along with their ships in orbit. But just like the name Lancer and what it's alluding to, the chassis are the tip of the spear point. The knights in shining armor. The knights in shining chassis. Or in this case, rugged, reliable chassis. KTB are the ones doing all the polishing. But when it comes to recruitment and who can be a wing, these are the best of the best, recruited from a massive pool of people that go out and test themselves, both as acting as a squire first, piloting in some minor engagements, and working their way up to being a wing. From those ranks, you start off as a petrel, or a young petrel. These are the equivalent of squires, some of the light armor troops here or there. These are all formed around small teams based around a single wing. All of them properly filling that squire role, aiding with repairing the chassis, looking up and being trained by them. And while people from outside of the Albatross can become a wing, or a petrel, most of them are taken from the populations of these MAKTEBAS first, all of the young and promising. Those that aren't usually stay back at the MAKTEBA, adding this entire support effort or working within the navies. Again, similar to the entire campuses based around Union or the KTB, recruiting the best of the best. And taking this role of petrel then to wing is a very big deal. It's a vow, it's a proper knightly order. The weight of which is that when you take this vow, it's expected that you are going to die in combat. You're going to die in the chassis you pilot. Or if not, you're going to retire to train the next generation back on MAKTEBA. And that's roughly about it. We don't have much on the Albatross, there's no direct faction focus on them, and they're not directly tied into any of the other factions outside of IPS-N. But even with that lack of information, that plays up into their nature. That myth, that ageless hero, the people that can appear out of nowhere in the void of space, coming to your aid, your call to help, the scream in the void of space, being answered. Because while Union heard the screams of the dead and dying from their colony ships, those fleeing from the fall initially, they wanted to choke the stars with life. But the Albatross wants to save those that are already there. Thank you for watching the video on the Albatross, the kind of good guys in Lancer. The exact specifics can be kind of whatever. Again, they fill that void since they're both disconnected relatively and narratively from a lot of the other factions. And geopolitically, or galactic politically, every individual MAKTEBA and commander can have this different role, this different minor tradition, or this split off from the group. The overall mission statement of helping people in cosmopolitan space, that kind of runs through. Or you can play even further into their heavy ties with IPS-N. The Albatross, however, when answering these calls, do have some limits. So just like IPS-N, they're probably not going to come intervene on behalf of stopping IPS-N from doing something. If they do, you know, alleged piracy. But this also goes for some of the other larger factions. You see, the Albatross aren't really here for long-term problems or big problems. Again, surgical strikes. That's not just for the surface ones due to a lack of deployment, but they're just here to come in, oh look, a distress beacon, we're coming to help. Maybe help them refuel, maybe help them just repair a bit. Or if it's pirates, deal with the problem violently and quickly. But anywho, thank you for watching, a thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.
Bye.